Mass at St. Peter's Basilica, considered the Catholic Church's holiest temple, in the heart of Rome, where former Indiana Senator Joe Donnelly now serves.
As U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, I will do all I can to ensure that the United States and the Vatican work together to advance human rights and dignity.
Doesn't get much better than this for a devout Irish Catholic like Joe Donnelly. His first meeting with Pope Francis? Listen closely and you can hear the exhilaration in his voice.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much.
The incredible journey of Joe Donnelly, grandson of Irish immigrants who grew up on Long Island, graduated Notre Dame, and wound up paving a path from Congress to the Vatican. Get to know him on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 90 of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Joe Donnelly was born and raised in Massapequa on Long Island in New York, the fifth of five kids, the son of a single dad, an experience that shaped him for what would come. Donnelly fulfilled the dream of many Irish Catholic kids and headed off to Notre Dame, where he not only graduated with a bachelor's in government, but also earned his law degree. South Bend has been home to Donnelly ever since. It's where he launched his political career, representing Indiana's 2nd District in the U.S. House for 6 years, then serving one term in the Senate.
I rise today for the final time representing the great people of Indiana here in the United States Senate. My 6 years representing Hoosiers in this body, and the 6 I spent as congressman for the 2nd District of Indiana before this, have been among the great honors of my life.
Little did Donnelly know there would be another great honor in his life, and he's living it out a half a world away in Rome, where he serves as the U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. And it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome Joe Donnelly to the podcast. Joe, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on, and I'm really good because I'm home in Indiana this week, so that's great.
Yeah, I was going to say you are back home in Indiana. It's got to feel good. We're going to talk about your role and some of the things you're up to now, but it's always good to get back home.
It is, and we now have a little granddaughter, and so that makes it especially fun.
That's outstanding. Hey, your role, U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. It's got to be an incredible job. Tell me about the job and what it's all about.
Sure, I will. And the amazing part about this, Gary, is my first day was February 15th, which was 9 days before Putin and Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I met with the Pope when I got to Rome to present him my papers. And we talked for over half an hour, just he and I. And 90% of it was about Ukraine.
Wow.
He said, "You're here at a really difficult time." And so in Rome, you're even closer to Ukraine at that point. And what has happened is the incredible attack on Ukraine, the massacres, the slaughters, the torture. The Vatican is doing everything they can to try to stop it. And my job is to represent the United States, U.S. foreign policy. And so I try to provide them with the information we have and that we know as to what exactly is going on there. So they have a crystal clear picture that's not filtered in another direction.
So you really are close to that Russia-Ukraine situation. Then I had no idea. You really are physically and in all ways close to it.
Yeah, one of the challenges is that the Vatican mission it's not like a traditional embassy in that there's visas or there's a trade mission to go meet with. It's more of almost working with the United Nations organization. It's the Holy See, the Vatican, and they have a global voice, and their voice is the moral voice of the world. And so what we try to do, what I try to do is to make sure that the Vatican understands exactly what's really going on there. That the Pope has a couple of times said, well, NATO may have had something to do with this. And we've tried to make it very clear that NATO did not. That was when you're looking for an excuse, you always try to find the easy one. And that's what Russia did. And so we saw just recently the Pope acknowledged Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia attacked Ukraine. And so my job is to try to make sure that we provide accurate, clear information for the Vatican to be able to understand what actually is going on there, and to try to explain to them, here's how we see this. Russia attacked Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine. They have murdered and slaughtered civilians, children, and Ukraine has a right to defend itself.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned meeting with the Pope. How frequently do you actually sit down and meet with the Pope?
Not on a regular basis. I've met with him a few times, but the number 2, Cardinal Parolin, he would be in effect like the Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. He's called the Secretary of State. I meet with him on a fairly regular basis because we also deal with other parts of the world as well. And we also deal with security issues. We were able to recently, we worked together in regards to a nun who had been kidnapped in Africa. And she was an American citizen, which obviously directly involves us and involves me. And so we worked together very closely to try to get her home. And we were just recently able to do that.
What, to the extent you can, provide any insight into the type of person the Pope is? I mean, you're having had interaction with him. How would you characterize that?
He's got an amazing sense of humor, which you wouldn't imagine,
No, I wouldn't. Yeah.
So the last thing we actually talked about at the end of our talk, we talked about very serious stuff, and then we talked about soccer. I wanted more to talk about baseball and football, but he's more of a soccer guy, and he feels the weight of that job. And what I mean by that is, about halfway through our conversation, he looked and he said, I am trying so hard to solve this problem, meaning Ukraine. He goes, and I just can't get there right now. Mm. And I thought, imagine having the weight of that on your shoulders. And then the next person who comes in is talking to you about food challenges in Africa. Mm-hmm. And so he carries a lot of a weight on his shoulders, but he also does it in a kindly way. What you'll see, Gary, too, when you go to an event with him, or to St. Peter's Basilica, where he might be, his natural first steps are to those who are suffering and struggling. Somebody who has a physical ailment, or a child who has challenges, that's who he goes up to and hugs. And that's where his heart is. And so he is also very, very disciplined, and he has a back of steel. Like when he makes his mind up, his mind is made up. I talked to one of the folks at the Vatican one time about an issue, and I said, well, has the Pope thought about this and this in regards to this issue? And they looked at me and they said, he is not going to change his mind. And I said, well, maybe just talk about it a little less.
Yeah, good point. I've got to ask you, I mean, you've been around a lot of very influential, powerful people, presidents, and others. I got to ask you, the first time you went to meet with the Pope, what was that like? You're a Catholic. I mean, what was that like for you? Just from your feeling inside, were you nervous at all, or what were your thoughts?
I wasn't nervous, which sounds strange. It was surreal, though, to walk into the Vatican, which is unlike any place you'd ever imagine. There's a hallway there, Gary. We were walking down, And they said, you see the paintings on these walls? And I said, yes. And they said, Raphael painted the walls when he was working here at one point. And
Wow.
I'm thinking Sherwin-Williams. And
Right.
But to go in and see the Holy Father, Pope Francis, it's really inspiring. My family was with me, and he went right over to our new granddaughter, and then to my mom. I was like seventh in line. But the other feeling that I had was to always remember I represent the United States, and that means everyone in our country. I don't go there as someone representing the Catholics in our country. I go there as representing all of us. And, folks have asked, well, how do you feel about this Catholic issue in America and this Catholic issue? And it's like, I represent the United States to the Vatican. I don't get involved in internal church politics.
Yeah.
Because it's probably worse than other politics.
Yeah. Well, speaking of politics, do you miss politics?
I'll tell you what I miss is I miss when I was in the Senate and in the House, the chance to work with other legislators who really wanted to get things done. Folks have said we were able to get, for instance, legislation called Right to Try, where folks could get access to life-saving medications early. And it's because of a young boy here in Indiana. And my partner in that was Ron Johnson. And people would go, well, how do you two team up? And it's like, because we both wanted to get something done. So I missed the chance to try to do good things like make sure that folks can get affordable health care. And I'll tell you what else I miss are the people of Indiana. The parades. We used to do over 50 parades every year. And, I'd go the next year, I'd be at the parade and someone would come up and go, I'm in my same place as last year. And I said, oh, that's great. And they go, now I'm going to ask you the same question again. But I really miss the people of Indiana and the people of our country, who would come to Washington and visit. And I hope people understand that that's their capital. Some of the stuff I've seen in the past few years has been heartbreaking. Because that's our capital. When the Capitol was attacked, I was watching that thinking of the people who worked in the cafeteria just below that their families, their kids. And these are just Americans like you and I who are trying to make our country a little bit better place.
Yeah. You were considered a moderate Democrat. You weren't afraid to buck your party on some issues. In fact, as I was doing a little research, the National Journal gave you a composite score of 52% conservative, 48% liberal. Are you a dinosaur? Does that exist anymore? I mean, it just seems like there are so few people in politics who are middle of the road. It's either one way or the other, left or right, whatever the case might be. Do you think that's the case?
Well, I sure hope not, because I think that's how we got a lot of things done. It's how we were always able to move things forward in our state, for instance, was when I'd worked together with other folks. And so my commitment, my job was always to the people who elected me here. Folks said, you work for this president or that president. And it was like a fundamental misunderstanding, because you work for the people of Indiana. You don't work for any president. You work with them if they're right. And I always said, for instance, when President Trump was president or President Bush was president, I wanted them to do well, because if they did, it meant Indiana was going to do well, and it meant people were going to have bigger paychecks. And so when it was good for our country, it was good for Indiana. And then it was the right politics.
Are you concerned about the tone of politics?
Yeah, I really am. In this way, we should be setting an example for everybody in this country. You see people so angry toward one another. And much of that comes from what you see on cable television, on the floors of the Senate and the House. And we should be the people who, when folks look and go, well, how should I think of this? It's here's what I believe, but this person is also my friend. They believe a little bit differently, and we're going to work on this together. That's how communities succeed. That's how our country has succeeded forever and ever. Can you imagine if it was World War II and you had, before you fought the enemy, we were fighting each other first. When we're together, we're unbeatable. And I can tell you this, over in Europe, what we see now is folks look toward our country after the fact that we stood up to support Ukraine. And you saw Republicans and Democrats saying, we'll stand together to help this country. Countries all across Europe and all across the world said, wow, America's standing up, we'll stand with them. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we put such a big coalition together. If we didn't, some folks, I hear America first, and I'm always for America first, but America is first when America leads and when America is helping to set the tone for a successful world. And that's when we do well. And when we try to, tear one another apart, I think sometimes folks don't realize this is a big planet, right? And you see two towns in our state or two towns in another state where they barely talk to one another. It's like you're not even in a county by county fight. You're in a street by street fight here. Yeah. And the more we work together, it's really true that 1 + 1 is 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's Italy like now post-pandemic? I know it was challenging times. Obviously, they're everywhere, but especially there. Well, what's life like in Italy?
It's pretty well back to normal now. The masks are done. People really tried in terms of masks and in terms of following guidelines to get to the other side. And so it's back to normal. It is the people love America, and they all come up and they go, I have family in New Jersey. I have family in Indianapolis. And it's like, do you know my cousin in Miami? I'm like, no, I don't. I have 330 million folks I work for, and your cousin is one of them. Before we get off politics, I do have to ask you, a lot of speculation. A lot of people think you're going to run for governor. Is that the case? Have you made a decision on running for governor? I'm not allowed to talk about those kind of things because of the Hatch Act, and I'm privileged to serve. President Biden asked me to serve in this position, and when the president asks, you step up. He's my friend, number one, so I would help him, and number two, he's the president. So I'm focused on that right now.
Yeah, but accurate to say you're not finished with politics. Would that be accurate?
Well, I'm going to work in my job later today as Vatican ambassador, and that's as much as I'm allowed to say at this point. More to come on that. Maybe we'll keep asking you that question here down the road. Really pleased to be joined by Joe Donnelly on the podcast this week. Much more ahead, including Joe Donnelly growing up, the younger years in New York State, how he got to Indiana, and a lot more when the Business and Beyond podcast continues.
This is Alex Brown. Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with Inside Indiana Business Radio on demand. This twice-daily podcast features our statewide Inside Indiana Business Radio reports with additional bonus content that you can listen to anytime, anywhere. You can listen now on the podcast page at InsideIndianaBusiness.com or subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week, Joe Donnelly, U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, former Indiana Senator, Congressman, and Joe, you are not a native Hoosier. You grew up in New York. Talk about, was it Massapequa? Is that right?
Right, out on Long Island. That was the name of the Indian tribe who was in that area originally. And I'm a second generation immigrant, and so my grandparents came from Ireland to Ellis Island. And the joke was that the last stop on the bus was where they wound up. They grew up. They raised my mom and dad. Actually, lived on the same block in the Lower East Side of New York. They got married, and moved out to Long Island when the family. I was the fifth of five, and when I showed up is when they had to get a new house. So, for an Irish Catholic kid, the dream was always to go to Notre Dame.
Yeah,
and I was privileged enough to be able to get in. I still laugh because my dad, when the letter came, he's like, "So what'd they say?" I said, "I got in." He goes, "Okay, we're going to the post office." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, once they cash our check, they can't change their minds." He's a very practical man.
That is
and,
good.
and for everybody watching, not to date myself, but the charge to hold the seat was $25.
Wow, $25. How about that? What was growing up like? I know you lost your mom, right, at a really early age. You 10 years old?
That was, you're numb, right? You barely function. You try to get through one day to the next, and think of my dad, who was now a single dad with 5 children.
Wow.
And it was never. He would go to work early in the morning when it was dark, and come home when it was dark. And we all pitched in together. I remember my dad saying, "Look, we've got each other. That's what we have. And we've got to get through this." And I was actually asked, I've not always been perfect, but I remember somebody asking me and going, "You never got in any trouble when your dad wasn't home, and you'd always tell us no, and you just go play baseball. You never got in trouble." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because the trouble I would have gotten in with my father would have been 10 times worse than the police."
That's good. Did that experience growing up, single father, family, how did that influence you? I mean, it had to have a real impact on you and your life and what you've become.
Gary, I see the families in our state where the single mom is trying to make things work. And I look at those kids and I go, those kids are me. And so what I had the good fortune of is a dad who made sure I stayed in school, who stayed on top of me, who stayed focused on me, who, said, you are going to college. This is not a discussion. I remember talking to him one summer. I drove a truck as my summer job. And I said, "This is really cool. I love this." And he goes, "Well, you're going to go to college. And then if you want to keep driving, that's great. But if you are thinking of doing this now, you're going to have to find another place to live." So he was, like I said, he was very practical.
Yeah.
But what it really hits home is how important family is, the struggles that you can have economically, or as a single mom, single dad, trying to get your children through, that you feel overwhelmed sometimes. And so my job was, how do I make it so that they can get decent health care? How do I make it that we have policies in place for them to get a really good education, because that gives them the tools to do anything in life. Mm-hmm. And so that's, I always felt a natural affinity toward those children. I remember a family here in the state. I found out that they had just lost their mom, and the boy, they were twin boys or boys very close, like 12 and 10. I thought, that's me. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote him a little letter saying, "Hey, you'll get to the other side of this. It's not fun, but you'll get there. And when you do, you'll make your mom proud."
Yeah. You mentioned baseball. Were sports a big part of your youth?
Yeah, if you heard my singing voice, you'd know I was involved in sports. I love to play baseball, sports, all kinds of different stuff. And so that was it was the traditional get home from school and then you're out in the park with your buddies playing ball till it gets dark. And then you go home and eat and study and go to bed.
Yeah.
And so it's not only something I deeply loved, it was something that probably helped steer me in the right way.
What you went to Notre Dame? Did you consider any other colleges, or was it just always that was where you were going to go?
Well, that was where I had hoped to go, and I had applied to a couple of other colleges. But what was interesting, for people of my background, like folks would say, "Well, did you look at the Ivy Leagues?" It's like I didn't even know what the Ivy Leagues were. That's just culturally.
Yeah,
wasn't part of who we are. I mean, if I had been lucky enough or blessed enough to grow up in Indiana, I would have certainly looked at IU and Purdue.
Right.
And I wasn't a very good engineer, so Rose Hulman would not have wanted anything to do with me. But we're so blessed with so many great schools here. But I was fortunate that Notre Dame took a chance on me.
What did you know what you wanted to do when you got your undergrad there at Notre Dame? I think you got your law degree there as well. Well, what did you want to do with your life?
Well, I wanted to, my dad had talked about what lawyers did and that kind of stuff. And so that was something that I had an interest in. It wasn't necessarily politics connected, but it was the chance to try to use those talents to help others, to help clients. And so I was fortunate to have that chance.
Yeah. How did you get into what steered you into politics?
Oh, I was an attorney for a candidate who had a recount. And so, I helped them with that. And then some years went by and I was serving in the Mishawaka Marian High School School Board, which is the Catholic High School School Board. And the way I wound up on that was I wasn't looking for it. I got a call from some of the other members of the school board one night. This is a true story, I promise. And they said, "You've just been elected to the school board." And I said, "Well, I'm not a candidate for the school board." And they said, "Well, we got together and, Marie had to family responsibilities, so can't do it anymore. So we picked you." I said, "Well, I'm trying to run a business and all those things and raise a family." And they said, "Well, if you're not going to do it, you have to personally visit the bishop and tell him." And my response was, "When is the first meeting?" And so from that, I knew the folks in the local Democratic Party pretty well. I'd contributed to various candidates. They called me in late 2003 and said, "Hey, would you consider being our candidate for Congress?" And I was real concerned about Iraq and the situation we were facing there, and thought, to complain about it and not step up really doesn't make sense. And so in 2004, I ran what wasn't successful, but in 2006, we took another shot and I was.
Should mention another life-changing event at Notre Dame. You met your wife, Jill, there, right?
I did. And Jill is, she's actually a Notre Dame student, but was also from South Bend. And so we both love South Bend. We both love Indiana. And I tell people, I laugh. She said she'd live anywhere in the world as long as it was South Bend. So
how did you meet there? What do you remember your first interaction?
We met in a class. We met in a class at Notre Dame, and she asked me what dormitory I lived in. And I told her, and she said, "That's the dormitory my boyfriend lives in." And I said, "Oh," and then I went and sat in my seat and minded my own business.
But eventually you guys got together, right?
Eventually we you talk about sports. We got to be real good friends, which is always a good thing. And did a lot of sports together, racquetball, tennis, all of that kind of stuff. And And, eventually we got together.
Yeah. Joe, as you reflect back your time at Notre Dame, your early careers, you think of mentors. I know in doing a little research for this, you list Father Hesburgh, maybe as one of your mentors. What was your relationship with him, and how did he impact you?
Gary, he had a relationship with everybody at the school. And what I mean by that was, so he lived in Corby Hall, which is a dorm right on campus there. And everybody knew if the light was on in his room, you could go up and see him. And I didn't do that, but it was the signal, 2 o'clock in the morning, because he was a night owl. The light would be on and somebody would be up there talking to him about a broken heart or an academic problem or a family problem. And so he was a world-known figure, but he was also like our leader. And for me personally, I'll tell you a story. It was with the Affordable Care Act back in 2010, which you know was so controversial in our state and in the district I represented. And I talked to him about it. And in talking to him about it, I trusted his judgment a lot. And it wasn't certainly, oh, tell me what to do or anything like that. It was, what do you think? Because I asked a lot of people, what do you think? And he said, if we did our job right at Notre Dame when you were here, you don't need, you don't need me to say, oh, I think this makes sense, or I think that makes sense. He said, that's what we should have done when we educated you. And if we didn't, that's our failure. He said, but whatever way you decide, it's going to be the right decision, because if you make this so that you make the right decision and not the easy one, you can't miss, and I'll back you up. Mm-hmm. So you can't beat that kind of advice.
Yeah. Were there others, any other mentors that come to mind who've really had an influence on your life?
Oh, my dad, who was dealt some really tough cards in life. And, the simple dignity of getting up every day and taking care of his family, going to work in the dark, coming home in the dark. People talk about heroes. That's heroic to me. And so when I looked at him and what he did, and he was not the most talkative guy in the world. My brother and I used to laugh and go, we'd go years without him saying hello, or, it was basically, get in the car, we got to go. That was an extensive conversation. My wife one time said, you don't say much. I said, it's an inherited tradition. But that simple dignity of trying to always do the right thing. I've never talked about this much, but when my mom passed away, Social Security, she had worked, so there was survivor benefits and stuff. And very traditional this way. My dad said, we're not going to do that. He said, some other family needs that more than we do. He said, I'm go to work, I get a paycheck, I'll take care of you. Somebody else is going to need that instead of us. And so, those are the kind of examples you try to follow.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. What's next, Joe? You've got a lot on your plate there in your current role. Have you thought how long does your term last?
It is at the pleasure of it is at the pleasure of the president, and so if he's happy, that's a continuing thing, and if it's something that on my end, I'm still able to do. So it's kind of, it's like an ongoing term. There's no set date.
Yeah. As you look at Indiana and you see what from afar, from Rome, your thoughts just on the overall state of the Indiana economy, life in general. How do you view how things are going here in Indiana?
I think the most discouraging thing was seeing the drop in college attendance. That is, the one, like I said, the one thing my dad said, you are going to college. And the tradespeople that I always work with, the different building trades organizations, were always sitting with their members going, you're going to get educated. You're going to get educated. And one of the things they offer to their members is college education as well, and skills education. So they're the very best in the world. I worry that if that number keeps going down, that those companies, the future is, Gary, is things like agri-engineering and automotive engineering and green energy and being at the cutting edge of biotech and medical engineering. And all these companies will come here and very, very much want to make Indiana their center. If we have the folks, we know the character of the people of Indiana. We just want to make sure they have the skills.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned some of these newer industries, electric vehicles, the batteries, all the components that go into an electric vehicle, and big plant potentially going there in New Carlisle, massive
Yes.
General Motors joint venture there. Do you think Indiana has an opportunity to really capture, some of that those billions of dollars of investment, all dependent upon, I guess you mentioned, workforce?
Yeah, I think we do. I think we're perfectly located. We're the center of the country. We touch so many big cities. We're such a logistics center. And so we have a great toolkit. And to be able to provide the skills to these companies, it makes it an easy decision for them. I was fortunate that I visited Dallara in Italy, which has a big presence in Indiana. Just the nicest people in the world. I've met Giampaolo Dallara, who's 86 and goes into work every single day.
Wow.
And his house is down the block from the factory. But I met with them, and Giampaolo Dallara helped set up the university and training system in their region of Italy for automotive excellence. And in that area is Ferrari, Maserati, Lamborghini, Dallara. Everybody's there because they know they have the skills. That we can be that too. And we talked actually with the Dallara folks. They'd like to set up and help with an automotive engineering program right here in Indiana. And they said, because that's where it should be. And that's exactly right.
Yeah. Joe Donnelly, the United States Ambassador to the Holy See. Joe, it's really been a treat to catch up with you and on your visit back to Indiana. Best of luck to you in your current role and whatever the future might hold as well.
Well, thank you so much.
All right. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. It's a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.